There are few more controversial issues in education than the role of religion in schools. Despite falling church attendance and growing concerns about a society divided along religious lines, the number of faith schools and academies of a religious character are expanding. Supporters of this development say that the religious ethos of respect for authority, moral values and academic excellence explain their growing popularity. Not surprising, therefore, that minority faiths are taking the opportunity to open their own religious schools. Their opponents argue that more selection by religious affiliation will further divide our fractured multicultural society, and that the presence of religion, both in faith schools and elsewhere in the system, threatens the liberal values of a modern nation. So what is the place, if any, for religion in a 21st century state education system? That's tonight's big debate. Good evening and welcome to the programme. Here to discuss the role of religion in our schools, I'm joined by a formidable panel, a select group of witnesses and representatives of all the major religions, as well as a studio audience of parents, students, teachers, all with their own forthright views on faith and education. We start with faith schools, the collective name for some 7,000 schools of a religious character within the state system. The overwhelming majority are Christian, mostly Church of England or Roman Catholic. But in recent years, other faiths have followed suit. There are now 37 Jewish and 7 Muslim schools, plus a handful from the other main faiths. They're popular and very successful. But are they really the way forward for a modern, multi-faith society? Professor Dawkins, you have a root and branch opposition to faith schools. In a free society, why don't parents have every right to send their child to a faith school if they so wish?
First of all, I don't have a root and branch opposition to religious education in the sense of education about religion. I think it's important that children should learn about religion. What I am against is the labelling of children with the religion of their parents when the children are too young to know their own views are. I'm all for children being taught about lots of different religions and then making up their own minds later. What I really object to, and I think it's actually abusive to children, is to take a tiny child and say, you are a Christian child or you are a Muslim child.
And that, in your own words, those schools that do that appall you.
Well, I think that a faith school...
I've got you here saying that exclusively religious schools are, quotes, wicked.
Well, I think it is wicked if children are told you are a member of such and such a faith simply because your parents are. Because after all, every child should be able to work out for themselves that it's an accident of birth that they just happen to be born into, say, a Catholic family or a Muslim family.
And for that reason, you oppose faith schools because, in your view, by definition, that's what they're seeking to achieve.
As far as I can tell, by definition, a faith school is propagating one particular faith, and it makes the assumption that the children in that school belong to a particular faith, which is presumably the faith of their parents.
Bishop Peter Price of Bath and Wells, what's your response to that faith schools are actually, and you like faith schools, are in this sense, in the ways as defined by Professor Dawkins, wicked?
Well, I'd like just to remind us all that the foundation of state education in this country began with Church of England schools. It was the Church of England that in 1811 began the general popular education process, which did not come into the state system until 1905. So there was a huge commitment by the Church of England to reach some of the poorest communities in every part of the nation. So that's where perhaps the state education we are talking about today began for the general public. I'm very encouraged by what Professor Dawkins says about the general debate on religious education.
Yeah, but we're going to come on to the general debate in many different ways.
Yeah.
Faith schools themselves, are they not as, or why are they not as Richard Dawkins describes them to be?
Well, because they are a place where the debate can take place in a discussion about religion. In Church of England schools, for example, all points of view are regarded as being valid and need to be there in the debate in religious education in particular. And there is an obligation to teach about other faiths and to have good
But they are driven by your faith, by your belief, that faith is the faith that is the preferred faith, if not the exclusively correct faith?
Well, I would just remind us a little bit about our own culture and our own history. I mean, the history of our country is fundamentally a Christian one. The Church of England and the state are, for good or ill, tied into each other, and that relationship has been a consistent one for many centuries.
Barry Sheerman, you chair the Schools Select Committee in the House of Commons. You don't like faith schools. You've just heard an account of the importance of the Church of England in delivering state education. Why are you against faith schools?
I'm not against, I'm wary. I'm not like Richard. I don't think you can reinvent the fact that, as has been said, there's a long history of the Church in this country providing education, and it's something you can't ignore. We are where we are. For years, I think, and I had my children attended Church of England schools, you would hardly know they were particularly religious or faith schools, I have to say, and I think that is the ambience over the years that has developed in the Anglican faith, and I think Catholics follow pretty close. I think we all become a little more worried the more people take their faith seriously. That faith has some central tenets that actually go against some of the most accepted norms that we in our society.
So, sorry, are you saying, if I understand that correctly, you don't mind faith schools so long as they're not really driven by faith?
Absolutely.
Once they're driven by faith, you object to them very strongly?
Yes, I actually think that is the situation of most ordinary citizens of our country. They're quite relaxed, they quite like the ambience of our culture being basically a Christian society.
So the bishop, because he's kind of liberal and soft and doesn't really say, I believe in God, one God, and only this God, but he says, yes, other things are important. He's kind of okay. Yes. But someone who says, I believe in Allah is not okay because they hold it more strongly.
It worries me when I take evidence in my committee or my citizenship inquiry where I found, for example, some of the evidence from the Catholic Church. You find it very difficult when they're talking about citizenship to talk about gay people in what I would have thought a balanced way. It worries me when I took evidence from some people from the Muslim faith where I thought that they were talking about women and the rights of women in a way that I find rather unacceptable in modern Britain. So there are certain issues where it does worry me when the faith, as I said, is taken more seriously and more fundamentally. Let me give you an example. Let me give you one example.
No, can I ask you, so we're going to come on to these specific things in a short while.
Right.
So if I can ask you to hold there, and I'll bring in Una Stannard from the... You're a sceptic, very clearly, from Catholic Education Services. Do you have one rule for the Church of England or the Catholic Church and another rule for Muslims?
Well, I can only speak for the Catholic Church, and certainly...
But for faith schools, you speak for the Catholic, but do you believe that all faiths should have the right to faith schools in the same way as you have always had, or for a long time, Catholic Church has had the right to faith schools?
I think there are enormous advantages to having maintained faith schools. If you have maintained faith schools, there is a great degree of transparency and accountability, and the inspection process, for example, by Ofsted, the public reporting, the regulations and so on that are in place, means that it's possible for everyone to get a very good handle on what's going on in those schools. And I would have said also, we have been very pleased to have a history of Catholic schools, of schools that thrive and are popular, and I would say that that possibility should be there for other faiths too. OK, we're going to pick up on a lot of these things. But to highlight some of the specific issues as they arise throughout the programme, I'll be inviting individuals with particularly strong views, we've heard some already, to take their stand at the podium. Our first witness is Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romaine. Dr. Jonathan Romaine is minister at the Maidenhead Synagogue in Berkshire. And you are against faith schools. Some people might think you're a rabbi, you'd be in favour, but you're actually against because you believe they damage social cohesion. In what way?
Yes, well, I am a rabbi, and therefore I do take faith seriously, but I am worried about faith schools that the social consequences, because if you have separate Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu schools, essentially you're segregating the children, you're separating the children, they are growing up in ignorance of each other, and we're going to have a whole generation who simply don't know what each other looks like. And yes, they may know about each other from books, but that's not the same as interacting with each other. And the same goes to parents, of course. If you separate the children, you're separating the parents who don't meet at the school gate, at school plays, at summer fetes, and therefore we're cutting a huge swathe through society, and precisely because it's a multi